It's the 2026 offseason, and we are still talking about major tackle depth problems for the Kansas City Chiefs. That's what we're covering today on Chiefs Coast Bias. What's up, Chiefs nerds? Welcome to another episode of Chiefs Coast Bias with your host, me, Malgore. It's 2026, and it feels like deja vu because once again, we're looking at places the Kansas City Chiefs need to improve to have a better season, and we're still talking about offensive tackle. This seems like a problem that has been perpetual for this team over the last few years, and we've seen twice where Kansas City lost Super Bowls largely because of major offensive line issues. That's not enough for Kansas City. And when we look at the history of this team, that becomes pretty obvious. In 2024, the Chiefs had 5 different starters at tackle. Wanya Moore started 11 games, someone who's been shipped out of town. Jawan Taylor started 16 games, which was great. DJ Humphries started a game. Of course, the season started with Kingsley Suamataia and the disaster that he was as a rookie left tackle. And we ended with Joe Tooney, a left guard, playing left tackle for Kansas City the last few games of the season, plus all of the playoffs. And he did an admirable job until, of course, we got to the Super Bowl against the Philadelphia Eagles, and it was not pretty. It was very hard for Chiefs fans to watch. And then we go on to 2025 last season, infamously only 6 wins, worst season of Andy Reid's Chiefs career, worst season of Patrick Mahomes' career. And again, we had 6 players start at tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. We had Josh Simmons, Jawan Taylor, Jaylon Moore, Esapole, we had Godric, and we had Wanya Morris all starting at tackle. Injuries, of course, devastated the tackle position. Wanya Morris famously only played, I believe, 1 snap against the Houston Texans before he blew his knee out and missed the rest of the season. So we have seen over the last few seasons that Kansas City will need depth. Even if you feel good about the position of the 2 starters at tackle, the odds of them playing an entire season without someone needing to come in, very low. Especially when we look at Josh Simmons, who didn't really play his senior year at all at Ohio State, started the season off, then blew his knee out. Last year left several games for personal reasons, then came back, had the elbow injury. Now you can say those aren't related injuries, it's a freak accident, but it doesn't avoid the fact that the recent trend is this is a player you can't count on for the entirety of the season, even though he looked great when he was out there starting the games that he did play. He looked like a very good starter, someone who has a high ceiling long term. But what do we have now? Keep that number in mind that there were 5 different starters to tackle in 2024, and that now we were looking at 6 starters at offensive tackle in 2025. As we kind of go through some of these players, we're going to start with Josh Simmons going into his second year. This is a guy who, if he hadn't been hurt his senior year at Ohio State, probably would have been a top 10 pick. Chiefs lucked out. We're able to get him with the last pick of the first round because of those injury concerns. And in all fairness, while he missed time, one was for personal reasons, one was from an elbow. Neither was because of that knee. So you can feel confident that there isn't some major deterioration of the knee. And this is someone you can rely on. I just question whether or not you can rely on him for 17 games. I think the reality of offensive line in the NFL is that you're never going to get through the season with just your starting 5. You have to have depth. And we've seen how tackle especially has been a problem area for this team. But Josh Simmons played 526 snaps last year, 8 penalties, only allowed 2 sacks. Pro Football Focus had his grades as pretty good. He had an overall grade of 62.7 and came in at 75.5 for his pass blocking grade. Someone who I think you can say when he's on the field is a average to above average starter, but has an even higher ceiling as he's only going to his second year in the league. Jaylon Moore also didn't do too bad of a job. He had a 63.1 overall. Keep in mind on the PFF scale, a 60 is considered an average player. So both players coming in just above that bottom average mark of 60. He's at 63.1, played 427 snaps throughout the season, allowed 3 sacks. Not bad. And then he had a 57.1 pass blocking grade throughout the season, which is slightly below average, but certainly not devastating. You can say competent play from those players where there may be a few snaps in a given game where they give some things up, but overall they can maintain, hold the wall, so to speak, buy Mahomes a little bit of time, and they may have some problems, but they're not consistent problems. They're random problems. They can be contained. Once you get past that, though, it becomes a lot different for this Kansas City team. Godric, who's going into his second year, was an undrafted free agent last year, only had 3 starts. He had a 58.1 overall grade and a 70.5 passing grade, which seems great, but he only played 186 snaps, and across those, he had 1 sack, 4 penalties. I'm not saying this means he's a bad player, but I don't think you can extrapolate a PFF grade over such a small amount of starts and snaps. So I don't think we can go in and say, like, well, he's obviously a better pass blocker than Jaylon Moore was because his grade was a little bit higher. That's not really how it works. He doesn't have the experience. There's going to be a lot of people where they're giving him moves he's never seen. He's not quite used to the athleticism of the NFL. It's a very high risk proposition to say that this is someone that you think you can depend on for a long stretch or potentially to finish out a season if you have a major injury at left or right tackle to go in and start. And it's mainly for me the lack of experience. I think that's so important across the NFL, but especially at tackle. Because there's so much nuance to the position, the different flavors that you can get in terms of twist and stunt coverages, where players can line up, the pass rush repertoire they use, the way they stack moves together. So much of that, I think, depends on reps over the course of the season, not only in practice, but in games. This isn't a player that's had a lot of that. Esapole, another second year player, also undrafted, had a whopping 33% more starts than Godric did, which is to say he had 4 starts last year instead of 3, and he came in right at average with his pass blocking at a 60.9 with a 56.5 overall grade. So right there, they're very similar players. You see an overall grade of 58.1, just below average, 56.5 for Pole, again below average. So these are players who can certainly get better. And I'm not saying they don't deserve a chance to get on the field, but I do think it is a major problem to say that both of your backup tackles have very little starting experience. Between the two of them, only 7 starts, didn't play at the highest levels in college, undrafted. For me, that's a big problem for Kansas City to be relying on them as their backup. But of course, we have the rookie sensation. This is someone Andy Reid talked about a couple of times in interviews during OTAs, which is Kahil Benson, who was a rookie tryout player that Kansas City's giving a shot on the team. So he may end up being a practice squad guy if it doesn't work out. And he played for national champion Indiana in 2026. Here you can see his relative athletic score was an 8.84. So he has pretty solid athleticism. His speed grade was great. His explosion grade was great. And he came out at good on his agility and good on his size. And they're saying that he's someone who played so well in the tryout that he deserved a chance. And they've been rotating at him in OTAs and giving him some snaps with the first team. I'm fine with that as well. But when we're looking at the players available for the Kansas City Chiefs, those are the only ones who are really getting any kind of rotation. I think we can all firmly say that Jaylon Moore is going to start at right tackle. Josh Simmons is going to start at left tackle. It's the depth behind that that I think gets Kansas City into some trouble. Where between 3 players, you have a combined 7 starts of NFL experience. The most experienced players are going into their second season. None of them were good enough to be drafted, which is not an end all be all or an indicator of what your career is, but it's certainly an indication of what the consensus was among the NFL of your immediate starting potential. If these were players that scouts and teams had seen as they can be backups, they could potentially take snaps or even start a few games at this point in their career, they wouldn't have been undrafted. It doesn't mean that they aren't those players and they can't become them, but it certainly means that there's a higher degree of risk and you're taking a bigger chance giving these players opportunities or relying on them if you have a major injury. And we've seen that as much as Mahomes can extend plays and make plays on the move, first, he's getting older. Second, he's coming off of an injury. So you can't really depend on the consistency of that out of structure production from Mahomes. And you certainly don't want him taking hits. You never want your quarterback taking hits. But when he's entering his 30s and he's coming off a major knee injury, and it looks like he's pushing to where he's going to be playing 9 months to the day from the surgery, is when game one starts, September 15th, against the Denver Broncos in Kansas City. If Mahomes is out there starting, it is even more incumbent on Kansas City to make sure that they are not putting in an unnecessary risk and that they've got this position shored up. One of these guys is going to start games for Kansas City when you look at the empirics of it over the last few years. So to me, this is a gaping hole. What can they do? Well, let's look at some free agents and see who exactly is out there. When you look at the list of left tackle prospects at free agency, you see here I have it sorted by the snap count. We had someone who did take 81.3 percent of his snaps last year. Taylor Decker, not even sure if he's still available. I know he was contemplating retirement. Also made $20 million. Cam Robinson is a player who's played for a lot of teams, has some experience, so I don't think that's a bad one. Beacham's pretty old at 37, so I don't really think there's much there. And possibly Cornelius Lucas played 27% of the snaps, 35 years old. Look, None of those are ideal options. They're all above 30. None of them are going to command salaries anywhere near what they had, but they are players who have a lot of experience and who, in recent seasons, as soon as last season for a lot of them, played a significant percentage of snaps. So they're at least not going in there doughy eyed, where they're not prepared for the athleticism. They're not prepared for the move set that's coming up on them. So I do think that this is a place where Kansas City should look to make a signing. And if you don't go left tackle, we certainly have some options at right tackle. I kind of like Jonah Williams at right tackle. Again, these aren't players that I think are great. These are players that I think have enough experience that you know you can plug them in and it won't be a total disaster. The problem you run into if you depend on these undrafted second year free agents or this rookie who is a tryout player, you don't know what you have. You haven't seen enough on paper. At least with some of these veteran free agents, you've seen enough so that you can say, it's not going to be great, but we know what it's going to be. So we can plan around their weaknesses. We can scheme around their weaknesses. We can put them in positions to deal with it because we at least know that they have certain strengths that have allowed them to survive in the NFL as long as they have. We can play into those. When you have these undrafted players going into their second year or the rookie again, it is very similar. It reminds me, look what happened with Kingsley Suamataia when they tried to bring him out as a second round pick and start as a rookie left tackle. It was an absolute disaster, and you don't have anything to fall back on. So the problem is, even if you see the talent there and you see the ceiling there in practice, when you're relying on putting these players in to start, there's no consistency. And I don't even mean consistency in what they do well. You don't even have enough tape. They don't have enough experience for you to know what they're going to consistently do well and what they're going to consistently not do well so that you can plan around it. It tends to be, I don't even want to say a boom or bust. It tends to be a mediocre at best or absolute unmitigated disaster at worst. So a lot of these players, I think, are players the Chiefs should look at just because of the experience. Look, if a tackle goes down, you can still put in one of these young guys, but have the veteran on the roster so that Kansas City at least has the option to bring in someone there that coaches are familiar with, they have tape on, they can plan around, and that we know won't be a total disaster. If worst comes to worst, they can give you reliable snaps. It's the known versus the unknown. And it's okay to have some unknowns. I'm not saying Kansas City shouldn't have players like this. We want the Chiefs developing young players. We want our GM to find really talented players, places like undrafted, places like rookie tryout. Absolutely. It is depending on them 100% for all of your tackle depth that I think is a major mistake for this team because we've seen that the starters are going to go down at some point, hopefully for just a very small amount, but it's very rare that they're going to play through all 17 games. The other thing that frustrates me about this situation is that we've been here before. It seems like every year Kansas City has, over the last few seasons, dealt with these issues at tackle, major depth concerns. Wanya Morris just got shipped out, and all Kansas City did was move up from the 7th round to the 6th round, which shows you about what the rest of the NFL sees. I mean, just a warm body to fill out in training camp, and just take a flyer on in hopes that maybe he's better than what Kansas City got out of him. I do think there's a little bit of misaligned investment here, which may not be totally fair to Kansas City. There has been invested in tackle. Left tackles don't just pop up out of nowhere. You can't find stud free agent ones. So the Chiefs addressed left tackle in the only way they knew how, first round pick. They invested $20 million in Jawan Taylor at right tackle, and say what you will, we know about our frustrations with the penalties, but overall, when he was out there, he was a competent enough player. He wasn't a complete liability in pass protection. He was someone you could depend on. So I don't want to say they've completely neglected this problem. Maybe it's more of a scouting issue where the Chiefs just have a hard time identifying and cultivating talent at the tackle position, and it forces them to go in with these really older veterans. They had Orlando Brown, they let him go. Now, he did end up signing for less money than he wanted, and maybe had he known that was going to be his contract, he would have stayed in Kansas City. They had Stevenson at the end of his career, had to let him go. They tried Humphreys off the street, didn't work out. So they've taken a lot of swings at this, but they still haven't hit. They haven't hit at the level where we can be comfortable not only with the starters, but also with the depth. But Kansas City needs to get this figured out. We've seen they can do it with guard and center, but the tackle position has consistently been a problem for this team to cultivate and improve. And at some point, the buck has to stop with Brett Veach. Now, again, you can't say he hasn't taken swings, but how many times are you going to swing and still find that the team doesn't have the kind of depth that they need. Now, you might say, look, they've taken these swings and we do have two starters. You can't get on them too much for lack of depth, but it's a compounding problem. The reason that they don't have very good depth at tackle is because it took them so long to solidify the starters. When you're hitting on all those players early, when you have a higher percentage of hits, that doesn't just take care of your starting position players, that also trickles down and helps the depth at the position as well. Where if you're scouting effectively and you're hitting on those tackles, then it frees up more resources to invest in free agency, to invest later in the draft at that position later on, and know that you're counting on that person to be a good backup instead of a good starter. Just overall, it increases the efficiency of your team and helps you build that depth over time. So I do think it's fair to criticize the Kansas City Chiefs for the tackle situation they're going into the season with. I like that they have faith in young players. If they do not sign a veteran, and it's still early, we're over 40 days away from training camp, but if they go into training camp and they haven't signed any kind of veteran at tackle with starting experience, I consider it to be a major blunder for the Kansas City Chiefs. But what do you think? Please like and subscribe. It really helps the video immensely to get it out. I just want to elevate Chiefs discourse, the amount of it that's happening, the quality, so that more people are aware, the fans can follow along, and we can have fun together as we evaluate this team going into a pivotal and exciting offseason for Kansas City. I am going through a move this summer as well as doing some traveling, so I'm going to try to stay consistent. You might see some different backgrounds than these stack of board games that I'm usually sitting in front of, but I'd really love to get your thoughts on it. Are you comfortable with who the Chiefs have behind their starters at offensive tackle? Are you comfortable with the starters? Do you agree with me that these backups are going to end up playing and contributing snaps? And do you think it's a mistake for Kansas City if they don't sign some veteran free agent tackle before the start of the season, really before training camp? Do you think that's a big mistake on the part of Brett Veach and Andy Reid? Would love to hear your thoughts on any of this. I'm Mal Gore. This has been another episode of Chiefs Coast Bias. You have a fan-flippin-tastic day. It's early in the afternoon, which means it's time.
Let's go to eat a damn snack.